If you're watching this, you probably don't have many close friends. And I want to be careful with that sentence because you've heard it before from people who meant it as a diagnosis. This isn't that, because here's what almost no one tells you. The absence of close friends is rarely a social failure. It's far more often a symptom of something the people around you don't have the equipment to see. Not a deficiency, a configuration, a particular way your psyche is built that makes the easy, frictionless friendships most people collect feel, to you, like wearing someone else's coat. You felt it. The room full of people who like you well enough, who'd call you kind or interesting or a little hard to read, and not one of them knows you. You can be surrounded and untouched. You can be the person everyone confides in and the person no one checks on. And the strange part, the part you've never quite said out loud, is that some quiet thing in you chose this. You could have stayed. You could have kept the friendships that ran on small talk and shared boredom. Something in you wouldn't. Carl Gustav Jung had a name for the people who end up here. He didn't think they were broken. He thought in many cases they were further along. People whose inner world had grown too large and too specific to be furnished by ordinary company. He wrote that loneliness doesn't come from having no one near you. It comes from being unable to share the things that matter most to you and from holding views the people around you find inadmissible. Read that again. The problem was never that you couldn't connect. It's that the connection most people offer asks you to leave the realest parts of yourself at the door. And so you stopped going in. What I'm going to show you in this video are the 5 traits Jung's work helps us recognize in people who live this way. 5 patterns that look from the outside like aloofness or coldness or being difficult, but that are almost always something else entirely. Some of these will be uncomfortable. One of them you've probably mistaken for a flaw your whole life, when it's closer to the opposite. But before we get to the 5, I need you to sit with the trait underneath all of them, the one that explains why the others exist at all. Here it is. Most people own a mask they can take on and off at will. Jung called it the persona, and despite how the word sounds now, he did not mean it as an insult. The persona is a necessary thing. It's the face you present to the world so that the world can deal with you without having to meet all of you at once. It's the version of yourself that shows up to the meeting, that makes the small talk at the party, that says fine when the cashier asks how you're doing. A healthy person wears this mask lightly. They slip it on in the morning and off at night, and they never confuse it for their actual face. Your problem is not that you have a persona. Everyone does. Your problem is that yours never learned to be casual. For most people, the mask is a coat. They put it on, they wear it comfortably, they hang it by the door. For you, the mask is a held breath. You can do it. You've done it your whole life. But it costs you something every time. A small expenditure of energy that other people simply don't seem to pay. And at the end of a day of wearing it, you are tired in a way that sleep doesn't fix. You come home from the gathering where everyone said you seemed great, and you lie on the floor for a while because the performance took something out of you that the performance was never supposed to take. This is the root. Everything else grows from here because friendship, the ordinary kind, the abundant kind, the kind that fills up most people's lives, runs almost entirely on the persona. It runs on the comfortable exchange of masks. 2 people meet, each wearing their easy social face, and they enjoy each other's faces, and that's the friendship. There's nothing wrong with it. It's most of human warmth. It's the texture of being alive among others, but you can't quite do it. Your mask won't sit still long enough. Either it refuses to go on at all, So you come across as intense or strange, or somehow too much, or it goes on but slips constantly, so that people sense there's something underneath it that you're not showing them, and that sense makes them keep a polite distance without ever knowing why. So you are left in a strange country, too deep for the shallow friendships, and surrounded almost entirely by shallow friendships, built for a kind of closeness that the world mostly doesn't offer, and unable to settle for the kind it does. Now you understand the ground all 5 traits stand on. Let's walk through them, one at a time. And as we go, I want you to notice not just whether each one is true of you, but how it has been protecting you, because every one of these is a strategy your psyche built for a reason. And you can't put down something until you understand why you picked it up. The first hidden trait is this: you experience closeness as all or nothing, and the middle, where most friendship actually lives, feels almost unbearable to you. Watch how other people do friendship, and you'll see something you've never been able to manage. They have layers. They have the work friend, and the gym friend, and the friend from the old neighborhood, and the friend they text memes to, and the friend they see twice a year. Each of these relationships occupies a particular depth, and they're all fine with that. The gym friend stays at gym friend depth for 30 years, and no one finds it sad. Most people have a whole graduated spectrum of closeness, dozens of relationships parked at dozens of different distances, and they move between them effortlessly. You don't have that spectrum. You have 2 settings. There's the vast outer ring where you keep almost everyone, perfectly pleasant, perfectly distant, and then there's the tiny inner room, and almost nothing exists in between. Someone is either a stranger you're warm to, or a person you would tell anything, and you've never figured out how to build the staircase that connects those 2 floors. So people approach, and they get to the edge of the outer ring, and they sense there's somewhere deeper they could go, and they wait for the invitation to the middle distance, the casual hang, the low-stakes regular thing, and you don't extend it. Not because you don't like them, because the middle distance feels false to you. It feels like a lot of effort spent maintaining a connection that isn't actually going anywhere, and something in you would rather have nothing than have that. Jung understood the psyche as a system that seeks wholeness, that wants the inner and outer to match. For most people, a friendship that stays light and pleasant and surface is no contradiction at all. For you, it registers as incongruence, a low hum of wrongness, the feeling of going through motions whose meaning has been hollowed out. You sit across from someone at the lunch they suggested, and you talk about the weather and the show everyone's watching and the thing that happened at work, and a voice in the back of your skull is asking quietly, relentlessly, what are we doing here? Not because you don't care about them, because you can feel the gap between this conversation and a real one, and the gap exhausts you. So here is the trap you live inside. The only friendships you actually want are the deep ones. But deep friendships are rare. They can't be manufactured on demand. They require the slow accumulation of trust that only happens through exactly the casual middle distance time you can't tolerate. The staircase you refuse to build is the only way up to the room you long to live in. You want the destination, and you've made peace with skipping the journey, and so you arrive nowhere again and again and call it being selective. And there's a grief in this that you've gotten very good at not feeling, because the all or nothing setting means that when an inner room friendship ends, and they do end, people move, people change, people die. The loss is total. You didn't lose one of 40 relationships. You lost one of 2. So, somewhere along the way, you may have made a quiet, mostly unconscious calculation that it is safer to have no one in the inner room than to risk that kind of amputation again. You told yourself you were being discerning. You were actually being careful with the wound. Notice that. discernment and self-protection look identical from the outside, and they often live in the same gesture. The man who says, "I just have high standards for friendship," and the man who says, "I can't survive losing another person," are sometimes the same man, and he only knows about the first one. The first trait, then, is not coldness. It's an intensity you've had to ration. You feel closeness so completely that you've learned to mostly do without it, the way someone with a thin skin learns to stay out of the sun. The second hidden trait is that you see too much, and you can't turn it off. This is the one I told you that you've probably mistaken for a flaw. Let's correct that now. You walk into a room, and within seconds you know things. You know who's anxious under the confidence. You know which two people had an argument before they arrived. You know the host is performing a good mood over something that's actually bothering them. You catch the half-second flicker on a face when someone says they're happy for a friend's good news, and they're not entirely. You hear the gap between what people say and what they mean, and you hear it constantly in almost everyone, almost all the time. You probably think of this as being perceptive or sensitive or, on your worst days, paranoid or judgmental. Here is what it actually is in Jung's terms, and it will reframe your whole life if you let it. Jung's most uncomfortable idea was the shadow. The shadow is everything about yourself that you had to disown in order to be acceptable. All the impulses and feelings and traits you packed away in childhood because the people you depended on couldn't tolerate them. The crucial thing about the shadow is that it doesn't disappear when you bury it. It goes underground and it gets projected outward. You stop seeing your own buried anger, and instead you start seeing anger everywhere in other people. You become exquisitely sensitive to exactly the things you refuse to look at in yourself. Most people are running this projection at full volume their entire lives, which is precisely why they can stand each other so easily. They're not seeing each other at all. They're seeing comfortable cartoons of each other, screens onto which they cast their own unexamined material, and the casual friendship glides along on top of all that mutual misperception, frictionless, because nobody is actually being seen. Somewhere in your past, you did some of the work most people never do. Maybe by choice, maybe because life forced it on you, you turned and looked at your own shadow. You faced some of what you'd buried. And the side effect, the thing nobody warned you about, is that as you stopped projecting your darkness onto others, the screen came down and you started seeing people as they actually are. Not as your fears about them, not as your wishes about them. Them, the real, mixed, incongruent, self-deceiving, doing their best, hiding something human being in front of you. This is a kind of clarity, and clarity is lonely. Because once you can see the gap between what people present and what's underneath, you can't unsee it. And most friendship depends on a polite agreement not to see it. Friendship, the easy kind, requires a certain generous blindness. Your friend says the new relationship is wonderful, and you can hear in their voice that they're scared. And you say, that's wonderful anyway, because that's the contract. The whole social world runs on tactful non-seeing, and you've lost the ability to fully participate in it, not because you're cruel, but because the lens won't fog up on command. You watch people perform contentment they don't feel, and you feel every time the specific loneliness of being the only one in the room who notices. And it cuts the other way too, which is the part that really isolates you. You can feel when someone is being performatively nice to you. You can feel when the warmth is professional, when the interest is strategic, when the compliment is a transaction. So a great deal of ordinary social warmth, which other people receive gratefully and at face value, arrives to you pre-deflated. They got a nice compliment. You got a data point about what the person wanted. It's hard to be nourished by connection when you can see the machinery behind so much of it. Now here's why I told you this trait is closer to the opposite of a flaw. You have spent years, maybe, believing that you're too critical, too suspicious, too quick to find the crack in things. You may have been told you're hard to please, that you read into things, that not everything is that deep. So you've doubted your own perception, tried to talk yourself out of what you plainly saw, given people the benefit of a doubt your own eyes kept revoking. But the perception is not the malfunction. The perception is the achievement. You see clearly because you stopped lying to yourself. And the price of not lying to yourself is that you can no longer fully enjoy the lies that hold ordinary social life together. That's not a flaw to fix, it's a cost to acknowledge. The question is not how to see less. It's how to find the rare people who can be seen and don't flinch from being seen, because those people exist and they are the only company that will ever actually satisfy you, and we're going to get there. The third hidden trait is that your inner world is more vivid and more populated than your outer one, and you genuinely prefer it there. This is introversion in the true sense, not the watered-down version the word has come to mean. Most people now use introvert to mean shy, or socially anxious, or tired by parties. That's not what Jung meant when he coined the term. He meant something about which direction your energy flows and where you locate the real. For the extrovert, the outer world is the real world. People, events, things, action, the buzz of the external. That's where life happens, and that's where they go to feel alive. For the true introvert, the inner world is the real world. The life of the mind, the imagination, the running internal commentary, the ideas, the images, the relationship you have with yourself, that's where the main event is, and the outer world is the place you visit to gather material to bring back inside. If you're this kind of person, you've been quietly puzzled your whole life by how much other people seem to need other people. You watch someone who cannot be alone, who fills every silence, who has to call somebody the second something happens, who seems to barely exist when there's no one around to exist in front of, and it's genuinely foreign to you, because you don't experience solitude as absence. You experience it as the conditions finally being right. The noise dies down and the real thing can start. The book opens, the thought completes itself, the inner room lights up. For you, an evening alone is not an evening you failed to fill. It's an evening you got back. And this means your relationship to friendship is structurally different from most people's. For an extrovert, friends are oxygen, the thing that makes them feel real, and a week without people is a week of slow suffocation. For you, friends are something more like rich food, wonderful in the right amount, with the right person, but not something you can or want to consume constantly. And a week alone is not starvation, it's a fast that leaves you clearer. So when other people are reaching for friends out of need, out of the simple inability to be alone, you're reaching for them. When you reach at all, out of a specific desire for a specific person, which is rarer and slower and far more selective. Here's the catch, and it's a serious one. The world is built by and for extroverts, and it has quietly decided that needing people is healthy and not needing them is a problem. So you spent your life getting a message that your natural setting is a defect, that you should want more connection than you want, that your contentment in solitude is a thing to be worried about, treated, fixed, pushed past. You probably internalized this so thoroughly that even now, even alone and at peace, a part of you is monitoring you, asking whether your peace is real or just a sophisticated form of giving up. So let me say the thing plainly. Solitude is not the same as isolation, and Jung knew the difference better than almost anyone because his entire model of becoming a whole person, the process he called individuation, required long stretches of being profoundly alone. He withdrew from the world for years to do the inner work that made him who he became. He believed there were depths of the self that simply cannot be reached in company, that can only be reached in silence, in solitude, with no one's expectations pressing on you. The person who cannot be alone can never become fully themselves, because the self that other people elicit is always partly a response to them, a performance shaped by their presence. You only meet the unperformed version of yourself when there's no audience. But, and this is the part you need just as much, solitude becomes a trap the moment it stops being chosen and starts being a wall. There is a version of your inner richness that is genuine wholeness, and there is a version that is a beautifully decorated cell that can feel identical from the inside. The difference is whether the door opens. If you could let someone in and simply don't because you're complete enough without them, that's wealth. If you've forgotten how the door works, if the idea of letting someone all the way in produces not indifference but fear, then your inner world has become less a home and more a place you're hiding. And the richness is partly a story you tell yourself about why you never come out. Only you know which it is. Often it's some of both. Be honest about the proportion. The third trait, then, is a real gift wearing the disguise of a problem. Your inner world is genuinely a place worth living. Just make sure it has a door, and make sure you're the one who decided to close it. The fourth hidden trait is that you stopped belonging to the group somewhere along the way, and you never found your way back, because some part of you doesn't actually want to. There's a process Jung described that almost everyone goes through in early life, and most people never come out the other side of. In the beginning, you are not really a separate person. You are a member. You belong to your family, your town, your class, your religion, your generation. And you absorb their values whole before you are old enough to examine them the way you absorb a language. You believe what the people around you believe. You want what they taught you to want. You measure your life by the yardstick they handed you. This is normal and necessary. It's how a human being gets built in the first place. Jung had a word for this collective, half-conscious group mind way of being. And the important thing about it is that it feels like the only reality there is. Most people live and die inside it. They never fully separate. Their opinions are their tribe's opinions. Their goals are the goals everyone around them happens to have. Their sense of a life well lived is the consensus sense, the house, the title, the milestones in the expected order, and they pursue it without ever once stepping outside the consensus far enough to ask whether it's actually theirs. And there's a deep ease in this. When your values are the group's values, the group is your home. You're never really alone because you're a cell in a body that agrees with you about everything that matters. You walked out of that body, maybe slowly, maybe all at once, maybe because a crisis kicked you out and you couldn't climb back in. But at some point, you started questioning the things you were supposed to take as given. And once you start, you can't choose to stop, because you can't unask a real question. You looked at the life everyone around you was chasing, and you couldn't make yourself want it. You looked at the beliefs you were raised inside, and you couldn't make yourself keep believing. And the moment you stepped outside the consensus to examine it, you lost the thing that examination costs you. You lost the automatic belonging. You can't be fully at home in a group whose assumptions you no longer share, even if you love the people in it, especially if you love the people in it. This is the loneliness Jung pointed at directly, the loneliness of holding views you can't share, of seeing things the people around you find unacceptable or simply can't see. It's not the loneliness of having no one nearby. It's the far stranger loneliness of being nearby, everyone and at home with no one. You go back to where you came from and you love them, and you cannot tell them what's actually going on inside you. Because the inside of you now runs on premises they don't hold. You become slightly untranslatable to your own people. And there's a specific ache in being loved by people who don't quite know who you become, in being welcomed home as a person you no longer are. The reason you never fully found your way back into a group is that going back would mean putting the questions down, and you can't. The price of seeing past the consensus is that you can never again be unconsciously held by it. You can join groups, sure. You can have colleagues and communities and people you stand alongside. But you'll always be partly observing the group from a half step outside it, aware of its agreements as agreements rather than as reality. And that half step is exactly the distance that keeps you from the easy, total belonging other people swim in without noticing the water. Now I want to be very careful here, because this is the trait the algorithm most wants me to flatter, and flattering it would do you harm. There is a seductive story available, and you've heard it 1,000 times in videos like this one, that says you don't belong because you're a special soul too awake for the sleeping masses, an enlightened one surrounded by sheep. Put that story down. It's poison dressed as honey. It will turn your loneliness into superiority, and superiority is just loneliness that has stopped being able to learn anything. The truth is humbler and more useful. You stepped out of the consensus. That's neither better nor worse than staying in it. It's just a different and more exposed place to stand, and it carries real costs that the people inside the consensus don't pay. One of those costs is this particular homelessness. You are not above the people who still belong. You are simply outside, where the wind is, and the task is not to feel superior about the wind. The task is to find the others who are also out here, because they exist, and to build the thing that comes after belonging, which is not isolation, but a chosen, conscious, eyes-open kinship with the few who stand where you stand. That's a real thing, and it's better than the belonging you lost. We're almost there. The fifth hidden trait is the one underneath the grief, and it's the hardest to look at, so we'll take it slowly. You learned early and deeply that closeness is dangerous, and you built a self that doesn't need anyone, and you got so good at it that you forgot it was ever a defense. The other four traits are temperament. They're largely how you're built: your introversion, your perception, your intensity, your stance toward the group, and there's nothing in them that needs healing, only understanding. This last one is different. This one is usually a wound, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise, because pretending a wound is a personality trait is exactly how it stays a wound forever. Somewhere back at the start, in the years before you had words for any of it, you learned something about what happens when you need people. Maybe you learned that the people you needed weren't reliable, that they were there and then not there, warm and then cold, and you could never predict which. So you stopped reaching, because reaching for something that might not be there is a special kind of pain a child will do almost anything to avoid. Maybe you learned that your needs were too much, that wanting closeness made you a burden, that the love around you was conditional on your not asking for too much of it. Maybe you learned that the people who were supposed to be safe were the ones who hurt you, and so the whole category of closeness got filed permanently under threat. Maybe nothing dramatic happened at all, and you simply grew up in a house where no one was ever truly known, where everyone was kind and no one was close, and you absorbed, without anyone ever saying it, that this is what people are, pleasant and unreachable. Whatever the specific shape, you came to a conclusion deep below the level of words. Needing people is how you get hurt, and a young psyche is brilliant and ruthless at solving exactly that problem. The solution it built was self-sufficiency. If you don't need anyone, no one can fail you. If you can meet your own needs, you never have to risk the terror of reaching out and finding nothing there. So you became competent. You became the one who handles things, who doesn't ask, who's fine, who takes care of others but mysteriously never seems to require taking care of. You built a self that runs entirely on its own power, and that self saved you. I want to honor that. It was a genuine solution to a real danger, and it worked, and you survived because of it. But here's what happens with a defense that works too well. It outlives the danger. The threat is decades gone. The unreliable people are no longer in charge of whether you eat. You are an adult with the power to choose who comes near you, and the defense is still running, full-time, automatic, treating every offer of closeness as if it were that old danger. Someone gets close, and a part of you that has no concept of the current year goes on alert. You find a reason to pull back. You get suddenly busy, suddenly critical of them, suddenly aware of all their flaws, and you experience this as discernment, as the relationship simply not being right, when underneath it is the oldest reflex you have, the one that says, do not need this. Needing is how you get destroyed. This is why you can have all the temperament traits in the world, and still the deepest reason you're alone might just be that some part of you is profoundly, secretly relieved to be. Because alone is safe. Alone, nothing can be taken from you, because you're holding nothing. The self-sufficiency that looks like strength is, in this fifth trait, partly a fortress. And the thing about a fortress is that it keeps everything out, including the things you actually want. Jung had a phrase for the central work of a human life, the meeting of the conscious self with everything it has refused to face. The wounded part of you, the part that decided closeness equals danger, it isn't gone. It's running the show from underground, and it will keep running the show until you bring it up into the light and look at it directly and say, I see what you did and why, and I'm grateful, and the war is over now. You can't argue a defense like this away with logic. It doesn't live in the part of you that does logic. You can only meet it the way you'd meet a frightened child who's been standing guard at a door for 30 years, not knowing the siege ended decades ago. You don't yell at that child. You don't call it a flaw. You kneel down and you tell it the truth. It's safe now. You can come in. The job is done. You can rest. And that, the meeting of that part, is where everything turns. So let's turn it. You've now seen all five, the thin and effortful persona underneath everything, the all or nothing intensity, the perception that won't switch off, the inner world you genuinely prefer, the step outside the group you can't take back, and the old wound that taught you not to need. And if you've been honest with yourself as we went, you've probably noticed that they're not all the same kind of thing. And that distinction is the most important thing in this entire video. So I'm going to say it as clearly as I can. Some of these traits are who you are. Some of these traits are what happened to you. And the whole task of the rest of your life when it comes to closeness is learning to tell the difference. Your introversion, your depth, your perception, your distance from the consensus, those are largely who you are, and they are not problems. They genuinely do mean that the easy, abundant, surface friendship most people fill their lives with will never satisfy you, and no amount of effort will make it satisfy you, and you can stop trying and stop apologizing. You were not built for many friends. You were built for few and deep and real. That's not a lesser life. For a person like you, it's the only life that doesn't feel like a slow performance. But the wound, the fifth trait, the part that turned reasonable selectivity into a fortress and called it freedom, that's what happened to you. And that is not the same as who you are. And you've been letting it pretend to be your personality. That's the part that has to be met. Because here is the thing that the loneliness videos almost never tell you. The thing that flatters you right into a beautiful, articulate, well-defended prison, being built for few deep friendships, does not mean being built for none. You are not too deep for connection. You are too deep for shallow connection. Those are completely different statements, and the wound has been quietly translating the first one into the second one for years. The wound takes your genuine, healthy unsuitability for small talk and uses it as cover, as an alibi, as a respectable reason to never let anyone all the way in. I'm just selective, it says in your voice, so you can't tell it apart from yourself. I just have high standards. I just prefer my own company. And all of that might be true, and the fortress is still standing inside it, and the fortress is the part that's actually keeping you alone. So here is what the work looks like, concretely, because Jung was never interested in insight that didn't change how you live. First, you grieve. There is a real loss here, and you spent years not feeling it. The loss of the easy belonging you'll never have, the friendships that ended and took half your inner world with them, the people who couldn't meet you, and the version of yourself you had to hide to keep lesser company. The years the wound ran the show and called it preference. You don't get to skip this. Grief is not weakness. It's the price of having loved a possibility, and you have to actually feel it move through you, not analyze it, not understand it. Feel it before the part of you that's braced against loss will believe that loss is survivable. It's the unfelt grief that keeps the fortress stacked. Feel it, and you can start sending the guards home. Second, you stop trying to manufacture the middle and you start protecting the depth. You're never going to be the person with 40 casual friends, and you can let that ambition die without mourning it. What you can have, what you're actually built for, is a very small number of people, maybe one, maybe three, almost never more, who can go all the way down with you, who can be seen and don't flinch, who are also out here in the wind and recognize you as one of their own. Your job is not to collect people. Your job is to become findable by those few, and then when you find one, to do the terrifying thing the wound has spent your whole life preventing, to stay. To not pull back when they get close. To not suddenly discover their flaws the moment they reach the inner room. To let yourself need them a little on purpose as an experiment, and to notice that the old catastrophe does not arrive, that needing someone in the present is not the same as needing someone in the past who failed you. Third, you learn to recognize your own people, and they are realer than you think. Jung wrote that when two real personalities actually meet, something in both of them changes, the way two substances change when they touch. You felt this maybe a handful of times in your life, the conversation that went somewhere. Conversations don't usually go, the person in front of whom you forgot to wear the mask and didn't notice until afterward, the strange relief of being understood without having to explain. That's the connection you're built for. It's rare. It does not happen at networking events or in friend groups assembled by proximity. It happens between two people who've both been out in the wind, who both see clearly, who both gave up the easy belonging and would rather have one true thing than 100 comfortable ones. They exist. There are more of them than your isolation has let you believe. And they are looking for you the same way you're looking for them, with the same fear, behind the same fortress, telling themselves the same story about how they're just selective. The reason you haven't found them is not that they aren't there. It's that finding them requires the one thing the fifth trait forbids, being findable. Letting the realest part of you show sometimes before you're certain it's safe, because the people who can meet you can only recognize you by the part you're hiding. The mask repels exactly the people the real face would attract. Every time you perform the acceptable version of yourself, you are camouflaging yourself from the very people you're lonely for. They walk right past you because you've made yourself look like everyone else, and everyone else is precisely who they're not looking for. So the medicine is not to become more social. God, no. You'd hate that, and it wouldn't work, and it would just exhaust you into deeper retreat. The medicine is to become, in small, chosen, deliberate moments, more visible. To say the real thing once to the right person and see what happens. To let one person see one true layer below the persona and watch whether the sky falls. It won't, most of the time. And the few times it does, the few times someone flinches or pulls back or can't meet you there, that's not your failure. That's information. That's a person sorting themselves correctly out of your inner room where they were never going to fit anyway. The wound experiences that as rejection and confirmation of the old danger. The healed self experiences it as the room simply staying clean. I want to give you the distinction one more time because everything depends on it, and the world will spend the rest of your life trying to blur it. There is a solitude that is the natural home of a deep person, and there is an isolation that is a wound still bleeding quietly under a story about preference. The first one is full. You're alone and you're whole, and the door is shut because you chose to shut it, and you could open it any time. The second one is empty in a way you've gotten skilled at not noticing. You're alone, and the door is shut, and you've half convinced yourself you don't have hands. Your whole task is to tell which one you're in any given season, because they look identical and they are opposites. One is a kingdom, the other is a cell with very good wallpaper. And the way you tell, the only reliable way, is to test the door, to reach occasionally on purpose toward one real connection, and notice your own reaction. If you reach and feel a calm, full freedom to either connect or return to your solitude, you're in the kingdom, and you can trust your aloneness. It's real. If you reach and feel terror, if the reaching itself feels impossible, if you can think of 40 reasons not to, and they all sound like wisdom, then you found the fortress, and now you know it's there, and knowing it's there, and the entire beginning of the end of it. So here you are, at the end of the 5, and I'm not going to tell you that you're enlightened or chosen or too good for this world. You've heard that song, and it's a lullaby that keeps people asleep inside their own loneliness, humming about how special they are while the years go by and the inner room stays empty. I'm going to tell you something less flattering and more freeing. You are a particular kind of person, built for depth and not for breadth, and the world mostly offers breadth, and that mismatch is real, and it's not your fault, and it's not going away. That part you can stop fighting. You can lay down the decades-long project of trying to want what most people want, trying to enjoy what most people enjoy, trying to be satisfied by a kind of friendship that was never going to satisfy you. Let it go. You're not broken for finding the shallow end boring. You are built for the deep end. Most of the pool is the shallow end. That's the simple, unglamorous truth of your loneliness, and it's nobody's failure. But you also almost certainly carry an old defense that has been hiding inside that truth, using it as a disguise, turning a healthy preference for depth into an unhealthy refusal of everyone. And that part is not who you are. That part is what happened to you a long time ago when you were too small to defend yourself any other way than by needing no one. And that part can be met and thanked and finally laid down, not so you can become someone else, but so that the person you already are can stop standing guard long enough to let one or two of the right people walk in. Because that's all you ever needed. Not a crowd, not belonging. Now a wide circle or a full calendar or the easy populous warmth that comes naturally to people built differently than you, just a few. the ones who see clearly too, the ones who came back from the same far country, the ones in front of whom the mask falls off without your permission, and you feel for once not the exhaustion of being perceived, but the relief of being known. They exist, they're rarer than friends, and worth more than all of them combined. And the only thing standing between you and them is a frightened, loyal, exhausted part of you that has been guarding an empty doorway for 30 years, waiting for someone to come tell it the truth. So let this be the someone. The siege is over. The danger that taught you not to need is decades gone, and you are not that powerless child anymore, and the door you've been guarding opens from your side, and it always did. You were never meant to have many. You were always meant to have the real ones. And the difference between a rich solitude and a lonely fortress was never how many people were in the room. It was only ever whether you believed you could open the door. Now you know it opens. Go find out who's on the other side.